So what I wanted to say spontaneously today is I've been like everybody else these days, especially these weeks coming up to this election. It's an amazingly charged time. Have you noticed? I mean, it's like amazingly charged. And I was watching Lester Holt the other day where they did a little thing on the epidemic of mental stress, and an 800% increase in Google searches for anxiety, depression. Amazing. And a really disturbing bit of data. I don't remember the exact age. Maybe it was under 17 years old. I don't remember precisely, but they said there's a 50% increase in 17-year-olds and below. And I don't know quite how they collect this data. It must be through social media studies that are talking about harming themselves or even committing suicide. I mean, it's just like unbelievable how charged this is. And you know, sometimes I think that I'm above that fray, but far from it. And so I think this kind of understanding this baseline angst. I mean, we have this general existential anxiety anyway, period. But now everything is just amped. Like, have you noticed? And so I wanted to share just a tiny little thing about a particular topic that has helped me enormously on this. And this is this vast, vast teaching on what are called the samskaras, S-A-M-S-K-A-R-A. It's a huge multivalent term in both Buddhism and Hinduism. And the reason this came into my mind this week is I had an encounter that was really revealing to me, where my reaction to this particular encounter was way out of proportion to the actual encounter itself. In other words, it was a relatively innocuous encounter that for some reason just really wigged me out, just completely like what the heck, WTF is going on here? And then I really started to think about it. It's like, why am I so triggered? Why is this one thing really triggering me here? And then, you know, as I sat with it, as I'm prone to do now, instead of turning on the TV or running for a drink or, and don't get me wrong, I love to watch TV. And as you know, I love my margaritas, right? You know that. I just sat with it. I literally went up into my shrine room and I sat with this, just like this fire, you know, I was like, wow. And I just sat with it and I sat with it. And then immediately what came to mind was this research I've done over the last years about these samskaras, which you need to know about these puppies. They are incredibly powerful explanatory teachings on exactly this type of hyper-reactivity. And the way it played into my situation is that I was acting in a wildly disproportionate way simply because I had not previously digested a samskara. So in other words, I had a previous experience that didn't go over all that great. And this previous experience, I hadn't digested it. I hadn't metabolized it. I hadn't allowed that energy to flow through me. And so then what happens is that unprocessed, unfinished energy then becomes lodged in my unconscious body-mind matrix. Literally at the level of the subtle body, this is what ties the subtle body into all these knots. So there's a subtle body anatomy and physiology that takes place here. In a real way, even psychologically, what's the maxim? What you resist persists. So I resisted processing, digesting, metabolizing this experience. And therefore, and this is the way samskaras work, they lie latent in your unconscious body-mind matrix. And then they're activated like seeds when a situation similar to the initial situation that planted the samskara comes about. And then kahoosh, you're not really reacting appropriately to what just happened. You're bringing this massive history to it. And I love this James Joyce quote, "History is a nightmare from which I am trying to awake." That's an astounding quote. In this regard, it's like samskaras are nightmares from which I'm trying to awake. And so I had not processed, digested, metabolized, burned through that previous experience. It was lying underneath it all. A similar experience came on, and kabang, I just went off in a way that was like, just like crazy out of proportion. So I sat with it, and here's the way to work with these puppies. This is what I should have done the first time. When I rejected the experience, didn't process it, didn't allow that energy to flow through. It reminds me of what Suzuki Roshi once beautifully said. He said, we shouldn't be smoky fires. We should be a good bonfire. We should live our lives as a good bonfire. And what he means by this, and this is my riff, is in order not to deposit these samskaras, and samskaras are karmic triggers. When samskaras are present, karma is created. So they are hugely important. So what Suzuki Roshi is saying is that we should, my language, we should cremate our experience as we live it. So therefore we leave not just no carbon footprint, but no karmic footprint. In other words, no samskara. In Sanskrit, the term is alangrasa or hatapaka, where you just devour the experience. And I had not cremated that first experience. I had not devoured it. I thought I did, but I didn't. And out of sight is not out of mind. Out of sight is into the unconscious mind, where it got buried, lodged, and now affects me. Samskaras, they're a hugely important topic in the Bardo teachings. When I talk about them in that context, I often say that when you die, you will meet your maker. Even though in Buddhism there is no creator principle, you will meet your maker when you die. And that's what you're going to meet. You're going to meet your samskaras, literally. That's what's waiting for you when you die. All that unconscious stuff, that's what comes up in the Bardos. And so you will meet your maker. And you can meet your maker now. That's the key. And so when I had this really uncomfortable experience, which was totally my gig, and I took responsibility for it, I went upstairs, I sat with it, and then the way to work with it is literally you just stay in that fire. It's like Da Friedjan once said, the great iconoclastic American mystic, the fire must have its way. The fire must have its way. And so I sat up there and just burned in a certain sense. I didn't indulge, and here's the practice. I allowed myself to stay with this incredibly uncomfortable feeling, which was precisely the same incredible, uncomfortable feeling I had before that I didn't have the guts to stay with. So here it is again. It came up again. And this time I said, okay, I've got to deal with this. So I sat with it. And the practice was literally just to be in those fires. Don't dilute it with conceptuality. Don't dilute it with discursive thinking. Don't dilute it with your storylines. All the things that come into play, just a constant spin doctoring of the ego that keeps these nasty samskaras alive. This is what keeps karma going. So when you're working with this stuff, this is how you purify karma. This is also how you stop the creation of new karma. Staying with really, mostly in these cases, unwanted experience. We don't like these things. Ego doesn't like so-called negative experiences. And so it doesn't relate to it properly. And then it gets thrown into your body-mind matrix. What I often playfully say, what is refused in experience becomes the refuse heap of the unconscious mind. And so then, we'll see how successful I was. But, I just sat with this hyper-reactivity and allowed it to kind of just burn without commentary. Just literally wake down and just stay with it without commentary. It ain't easy, man. It ain't easy. Parenthetically, for those of you who do really deep inner yoga practices, like the inner fire practices, Kundalini, Tumo Chandali, that's precisely what that does. That supercharged fire practice is exactly designed to do this. But if you do this moment to moment, you don't have to do that fire practice because you cremate the experience when you live it. And so I wanted to throw that into the mix because right now, it's in my experience, this extraordinarily high, the temperature on, I mean, talk about the metaphor of global warming. The temperature is just so high. The baseline is just in the inflammatory processes. The world is inflamed, the world has a fever, socially, culturally, I mean, the world is on fire. There's a sutra by the, not by the Buddha, because the Buddha didn't write anything, but called the Fire Sutra. Check it out. It's all about what's happening now. This world is on fire. And this type of practice, using that metaphor, is a very powerful anti-inflammatory. It's a way to purify these inflammatory processes by actually, ironically, staying in the fires. And that's what purifies